All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at Venture Cafe for Destructive Geographies, Mapping Philadelphia and Manhattan. Tonight, I'm very excited to present the work of Philadelphia-based artist Talia Greene. I've actually known Talia for a few years now. For a period of time, we were both members of the artist collective Grizzly, and we've worked together on various curatorial projects. And Talia is also one of our upcoming artists in residence at the Science Center's BioArt residency program. She's going to start in April. So I'm looking forward to working with her more, and that's in collaboration with the biotech company Integral Molecular. So Talia's work focuses on the interaction of history and place in her site-specific wallpaper-based installations. She reframes our past to shed light on current topics related to social justice and the environment. Talia received her BA from Wesleyan University and her MFA from Mills College. She's exhibited her work widely across the United States, and she's currently an adjunct professor at Drexel University. So now I'd like to hand things over to Talia.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Angela, for inviting me, and thank you all so much for coming. It is just so wonderful to see all of your faces from just all over the world, like we were saying, in all different parts of my life. And it's even fun to see people who I don't know. I wasn't expecting that, so that's kind of cool too. So I will share my screen and get started. And hopefully I won't have the same technical difficulties that I had in my class today. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about two site-specific projects, Charting a Path to Resistance at the Philadelphia City Archives and Passage at Morris Jumel Mansion. And I thought it would be interesting to discuss these two projects because they both highlight the use of maps, not as objective documents of our surroundings, but of instruments or artifacts of the destruction of the environment and the oppression of people. And because my work is site-specific and is located in historic spaces, the role of time is a key theme in my work. So today I'll be talking about how maps can reveal aspects of our past which have been forgotten or are even in some cases actively suppressed. And along the way, I'll talk about how my ideas developed, and we'll also show physical examples of the work that went into the piece at the end of each presentation. So as I was saying to Angela, who was asking about questions, I mean, if someone has a burning question, feel free to jump out, but I'll talk for a little bit and then ask people if they have any questions. If there are no questions, I'm gonna open up some boxes that have materials that I've saved from the projects, and then I'll go on to the next project. So I'll start with the City Archives project. So for the discussion of the City Archives project, I thought I would start with the map of Philadelphia, since there are some people here tonight who are not from here. And you can see on the map where the new location of the Philadelphia City Archives is. It's just right here. And you guys can see my cursor now, correct? Yeah. Yes. So this is where the new location of the City Archives is, and it's not too far from City Hall. It's on 6th and Spring Garden, for those of you who are from Philadelphia. And the City Archives holds all the documents that have anything to do with the city. And since Philadelphia has a central place in the founding of the country, it has a lot of important documents. And on the right is the original city charter from 1701, which was signed by William Penn. But it also, of course, has a lot of other less exciting documents too, since it houses all of the old birth and death records and real estate indentures, etc. And I just want to give a shout out to the woman in the purple sweater. That is Jill Ronsley, and I think she's here tonight. And she was the archivist at the time when I started the project and is just a wonderful human being and was super helpful for this project. So that is Jill. And then behind her is the Commissioner of Records, Jim Leonard. Okay, so the project was commissioned by the city through a nationwide program called Percent for Art, in which a percentage of the budget for a city building project is allocated for a public artwork. And any commission involves working with the city through the Office of Arts and Culture, as well as whoever is in charge of the site. And in this case, it's the Department of Records. So it really is a collaborative process between the artist and two organizations. And because they were building an entirely new location for the archives, it was quite a big project, and the percentage allocated for the public artwork was $80,000. So that enabled me to really think big for the project and also to hire a team without whom this project would have been impossible. So I'll talk more about that team in a minute. But the whole thing was just a cool experience. The finalists for the award were asked to create a proposal for the piece before the building was built. And so these images show some of the plans that were given to us as we were asked to create our proposals. So most of my work prior to this project was works on paper, which often took the form of wallpaper or mural-based pieces. So that was a natural starting place for my proposal. But since the budget for the project was so big, I knew that a mural would not cost $80,000. So I decided to be more ambitious and to propose an augmented reality app to accompany the mural. And just a side note from that, I realized that the leap from muralist to app sounds kind of crazy. And I think I had a little extra confidence taking that leap because I have a very close friend, Alex Henning, some of his relatives are here tonight, who has a company in Los Angeles that does AR and VR development. So I was able to consult with him early on in the process, and that helped me to move forward without feeling like I was completely in the dark. So, but needless to say, the AR concept really expanded the amount of work that would go into the project, as well as the opportunities for collaboration. So there were two components for the creation of the app. One was the digital production side, and I interviewed two groups and decided to hire Variant VR, which is an offshoot of a local company called Center City Film and Video. And there were probably maybe at least 10 people, maybe more, from that company who worked on the project, starting with the early conceptualization and moving through the coding, animation, sound editing, and for those of you who Philly people, they are an awesome company to work with. I think some of them are here today. And then another component of the app was the research and writing. And I found a wonderful person, Charisse Blakeney, who was an American history grad student, to be the lead researcher on one of the two topics for the project and the app. And I also hired a former student of mine, Jordan Deal, to be a research assistant. And he also assisted me on the mural production. So the three of us spent many hours discussing which stories and people to highlight. And then we worked with Variant to bring it all together. So there were two main historical topics which are covered in the app: abolitionism and housing discrimination. And Charisse was doing her thesis on the history of abolitionism in Philadelphia, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find someone to work on the topic of housing, so I ended up doing that part myself. And Jill, who I mentioned earlier, the archivist, suggested that I create an advisory committee, which ended up being an amazing aspect of the project. And Jill introduced me to V. Chapman Smith, who is here, thank you, V, who's an historian and a former archives commissioner, who was instrumental in bringing the statue of Octavius Catto to City Hall, for those of you who are from Philly or have visited. And V helped me to assemble a team of local education and archive specialists to be on the advisory board. And I also reached out to all of the authors of the books that I used as resources, and they advised me on the content and tone of the articles through countless meetings, conversations, and email exchanges. And I'm not sure if Charlie is here. I think he might be. If he is, I can't see you guys. But he is the co-creator of the website Going North, and he was on my advisory committee. And he, along with V, read and gave feedback on every single article in the app. And all of the other historians read articles that were related to the books that I read. So got a ton of help for this project. And it was just an incredible experience collaborating and learning from so many people. But before I assembled the team, I had to come up with the winning proposal, of course. So I thought I would walk you through that now and talk about how I went from this. So this was the architectural rendering of the reading room, one of the renderings they gave us, to this. This is one of the images that I submitted as for the proposal. And then this, which is an installation shot of the finished piece, which is in the reading room. So after being selected as a finalist, I and 4 other artist teams were given access to the archives, and you can see images here. I wanted to really give you a sense for the scale of the collection in the archives. It's massive. So we had a few months to come up with our proposal. And of course, needless to say, given how many documents there are, it was a pretty daunting task because I mentioned the documents in the archives go back to the founding of Philadelphia and encompass every document that it is any way related to the business of the city. So the majority of the documents are written words, but there's also a huge photograph collection. And many of the documents do have some visual interest, of course, the photos for sure, but even the ones with the written words are pretty interesting, especially the old ones. But I was initially attracted to the maps in the collection. So all of the old maps are, of course, hand painted, and many of them have really strong design qualities, including a very simple yet powerful way of depicting depth that almost has a trompe-l'oeil quality to it. And I love the way the gray lines, you can see here, create shadows that make the street appear to pop forward. And I ended up incorporating that element in the final design. So I was drawn to the formal qualities of the maps, but the more I explored them, the more I became fascinated by the way that the maps depicted time through the layering of infrastructure over the natural topography. And I particularly love this map on the left, which is a section of Northeast Philly. And you can see from the map, it's currently a dense urban neighborhood, but originally there was a surprising number of streams in the area. And you can see the streams here, these black lines. And the red lines that are here indicate the conversion of streams into sewer lines. So the map was used as a tool to control the environment, but it also reveals aspects of the geography, which today are unseen and possibly forgotten. So these are some initial sketches that were part of the early brainstorming process. And I knew I wanted to juxtapose the city grid with the waterways and incorporate the theme of layering and time in maps. But I also knew that I wanted to address some of the topics related to social or political issues involving the people who've lived in the city. I just didn't know how I was going to do that. But in my experience, serendipity plays a huge part in a successful project, and that was definitely the case for me here. So on one of the days that we were touring the archives, this racial map of Philadelphia was sitting out. And I think I could be wrong, Jill can correct me, but I believe it had just been donated to the archives. And I think I just saw the cover, but that title, Racial Map of Philadelphia, raised many questions and some alarm bells in my head. So on the surface, the cover has many of trappings of objectivity, which we associate with maps, including a legend, an index, a bold, simple title. But you can also see, if you look closely, some of the many problematic assumptions underlying white supremacy playing out on this very page. So based on the title, you might assume that the map maker would be documenting every group in Philadelphia, Racial Map of Philadelphia. But in fact, if you look closer at the key and then the map, you see that white people are not represented on this racial map at all, because all white occupancy is indicated by everything that is not highlighted by a color. So here you can see in the key all white occupancy in block, but then it's basically just blank, it's not a color. So what is highlighted on the map is indicated as all or mixed in the key. And we can assume that this all or mixed group is the racial group indicated by the title Racial Map of Philadelphia, but who constitutes all or mixed is left ambiguous. So it's only when we read the attached cover letter that we're sure of the goals of the map. So the first sentence of the letter reads, "We have recently completed the racial map for the city of Philadelphia, showing those blocks on which there exists colored occupancy." So that tells us what the map makers were trying to do, or at least looking for. And then reading further, you can see the eagerness with which they were completing this mapping project. So it says, "The matter has been discussed with Mr. Mosier, who's always been cooperative with us and has displayed a good deal of interest in this project." And then reading through the end of the letter, you can see how the subtle or not so subtle attempts to bury what we now know is a shameful yet important part of our history. So while the creators attempted to obscure their motivations, the choices they made in the creation of the map exposes their biases. These are all the maps that were created for this particular survey in 1943, which is documenting the areas where Black people lived throughout the city. But they're not isolated maps, and they were in fact part of a widespread discriminatory practice throughout the city, throughout the country, known as redlining. So starting in the 1930s, both the federal government and private companies mapped and categorized neighborhoods according to the race and ethnicity of its residents. The maps were then used by banks and loan corporations to assess whether or not to give the applicants a loan for a new home. And areas with high concentrations of Black people were deemed the most risky. We now know that the practice of redlining was instrumental in creating the highly segregated cities and vast inequality that exists today. So given this dark and troubling aspect of our history that's reflected in a document from the archives collection, and developing the concept for this public art project, which would represent the collection, I asked myself, was there a way to use these maps to both expose the painful truth of the history, but also to tell the story in a way that would highlight the strength of the community's response to oppression? So that question led me back again to the map on the left, which is a reminder that maps can be instruments of control. In the case of the map on the left, harnessing streams to be used for urban infrastructure. But as historical artifacts, maps can also reveal or expose forgotten layers of history. So those forgotten parts of our history and geography can help provide perspective on how to move forward in different ways in the future. So in the mural, I decided that the redlining maps would gradually be cut away to reveal documents or photos which tell stories of resistance. So each document featured in the mural first appears completely obscured by the redlining map. So this is a section of the redlining map. And each time it's repeated, more of the redlining map is cut away. And I want to give a shout out to Jordan. I'm pretty sure he's here, but I didn't see him. But one of my research assistants was also the main assistant for the mural production. And he was the one who is responsible for, in Photoshop, cutting out all of those sections of every single map on the mural, which was a lot of work. So when all of the redlining map is done, the archives document, and in this case, a photo from the collection, becomes a gateway for more information through the use of the app. So this example, which is now outlined in red and situated in the mural, is the hotspot for poor housing conditions lead to action. So when viewers first scan this document, images from newspaper articles about a building collapse appear in front of the original image, and that is the augmented reality component of the experience. So I have a little video for you to see. It goes by very quickly, but just gives you a sense for what the experience is like on the screen. And then because that goes by very quickly, I wanted to also kind of recreate what that experience is. So when you hover your camera over a subject on the mural, just like any other camera function, you see what's in front of you on your screen. And then when the app recognizes the image, the scan triggers an AR animation in which other images appear to hover in front of the subject. So that kind of gives you some sense for what's happening for the augmented reality section of the app. And then on the right is a screenshot of what viewers see after the AR animation. So first there's a short animation with images and voiceover, which introduces viewers to the content and raises questions that will be raised in the article. And then there is an article that can be read or listened to with voiceover narration. So other than the collaboration aspect of the project, one of the most fun things for me about this project was the research that I got to do with many, many hours looking through other archives in the city, including the archives at Temple University. For those of you who are from Philly or live in Philly, it has an incredible archives. I highly recommend checking it out. And of course, the free library. So these are two screenshots from the Poor Housing Conditions Lead to Action article, which shows some of the additional archival materials that viewers can see. So this is an overview of the mural in the foyer, and the foyer obviously is what you see when you first enter the building. And you can see here, that's the poor housing conditions hotspot, which is outlined in red. So all of the scannable documents are outlined in red. And so here are some of the other documents outlined in red. And then there are previous states of all of these exposed documents that are outlined in green. So this is the introductory hotspot. It was one of my favorite images from the archives collection that I wanted to use. And so the introduction provides a contemporary context for the importance of the historical topics that are covered in the mural. And Ricky, who is the main app coder, and I really worked hard on the AR content here. I slowed it down so you can see, but it has just rays of light coming through the window. You know how easy that is to see, but we had fun with some of the AR animations, and that was, I think, one of my favorites. So the next document after the intro is the topic of changing neighborhoods, 1940 to 1964. And then as viewers move through the mural, they proceed back in time. So the stories of resistance to housing discrimination transition into stories about resistance to slavery. And then the last document in the mural is from Anthony Benezet's will, and that would be right here. That's the first document. And that is just a detail of his will. So this hotspot discusses early activism in Philadelphia starting in the 1700s. So this is the last slide, just to give you another overview from the reading room. So at this point, I will stop sharing my screen. I realize that might be a bad idea, but I want to see you given the technical difficulties earlier. So I can either answer questions or I can show some examples of some of the materials that went into making the piece. Of course, the technical problems were due to me trying to have a camera to show you those things. So we'll see what happens if I try to do that, but I'm willing to give it a shot. Does anyone have any questions?
And we can take questions in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask Talia.
Okay, so Jessica said, how long did the project take? It was, and some of the other people who are here might correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was about 1.5 years. I think it was about 1.5 years. And it took over my life. It was a lot of work.
It's amazing how much project management must have been in this.
Oh my God, yes, you are so right. My job was project management, yes, because all of the work that went into designing the mural happened before when I applied for it, right? So I didn't actually have to design anything. We definitely spent a lot of time designing the app, but most of it was project management and research and all of the work that went into the app, and then photoshopping, yeah. Of which Jordan helped me with a lot. Hey, Jordan, I hear you now.
Is there any technological developments that you would have incorporated had they been available at the time, like VR or anything like that?
I don't think that I would have done VR. No, I think that what we did was just right for this, because VR has the kind of cool factor. And, you know, one of the audiences that was really important to us was kids. And, you know, we thought a lot about in designing the content for the app, how we could, you know, bring a younger generation into these stories. And so, you know, the AR component creates that sort of fun entry into it, but the VR would have created a whole other thing. It looks like there are some other questions. Michelle saying, oh, okay, no, that's just to me, sorry. Angela, I don't know if you want to read.
Sorry, we have a comment. People should know that the city's arts office was very excited about your project. Your submission was a standout among the proposals.
Thank you, B.
And then another person said, I never realized what a huge job doing this type of mural involves. It's so impressive.
Daphne, you had a question.
Hi, Talia. Thanks so much. This is so interesting. I mean, I totally have understood that the mapping of race and peoples within the city, you very clearly outlined that. But was there like any of these moments that would trip off? Is there more detail about the actual kind of administration about that? Because it's quite like obviously very deeply entrenched as to how that was even conceivable. And I think in some sense, like you've beautifully made it visible. But I'm just curious, like, are there any particular examples of where, how can I say, the kind of preliminary organization to get to the point of just even thinking about mapping the city in that way and racially, and then to obviously with the intention of discriminating against people. Was there material from the archives that revealed any of these preliminary conversations that kind of defined the intention behind this mapping?
Well, I mean, I do want to say first, I'm not an expert on this, so there might even be people here tonight who might be better at answering this, but I think I have a few comments, I guess. One is that, and the reason why I showed that letter is because it makes it clear how much the people who were responsible for redlining were trying to not make it really known, you know, and in fact, a lot of the documentation and materials around housing discrimination were destroyed and lost and forgotten about. And so to me, again, I'm not an expert, but my sense is that the people who are interested in researching this, it's required a massive amount of digging to find that kind of documentation. I know I did speak to one of the historians who was on the committee. Kianga Yamada Taylor she just came out with a recent book on housing discrimination, and she commented on how unusual it was that the archives actually had that redlining map because of how unusual it is to find that just very clear documentation. But the other thing that I would say is the Color of Law, I think it's called, is an incredible book on the history of redlining. I highly recommend it if you're interested in the history. Does anyone else have anything to add? Because I feel like there might be some people who know more than I do about this here who might want to add anything. Okay, yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, we have a question from Renee. Are there new projects arising in your mind from the research around housing and racial history in Philly, if any?
I'm just laughing because I guess I'll just be really honest. I know most of you well. You know, it took me about a year and a half to get this project out of my system because it really, when I say it took over my life, I really mean it. Like it was kind of, it just consumed me, and it was very hard to to think about other things. And I did apply to some things that were related to this because I was interested in expanding on it, but I didn't get those things. However, now that I think about it, the project that I'll hopefully be working on at Integral Molecular will possibly have a connection, because I'm interested in looking at the connection between housing and health inequities and health disparities, and specifically related to COVID. So I am really interested in continuing to work on this research, but you kind of take it one step at a time.
We have another question. Did anything really surprise you when you viewed the archives?
Surprise me. It wasn't so surprising as just impressive how massive it is. And also just, I felt extremely lucky to have the opportunity to work with all of these incredible old documents and do something that could potentially help other people experience them. So it wasn't so much surprising as just amazing. It's kind of a stupid word, but I'm looking at the time though, Angela, and I'm just wondering whether, I don't know if this is something that can go over, but I did have another project to talk about. We could just focus on this, but I was prepared to talk about another project. So
I mean, we can go over a little bit. I'll just read out some of the comments. Virgilia says, as an archivist, it was exciting to work with an artist to visually illustrate stories and help viewers delve deeper into history. It was fabulous working with Talia. And then Bob says, it seems like your work might have led you towards environmental engineering, the burying of streams to make way for development, or social engineering, race-conscious lending. How did you decide which line of investigation to pursue in a primary way?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think because the archives I was thinking about what is most important about the archives, and while maps and geography and the environment is an aspect of the archives, what's most important about it in terms, not important, but just, the majority of the documents are about people. And, when people come to visit the archives, they're looking up old relatives, or, it's about people. So I think that telling stories of people was the best way to celebrate what the archives is about, I guess. Yeah.
Cool. So V. Chapman Smith says, you can find answers to that in the administrative records of city agencies if they survived. Some of these records can be found at Temple Urban Archives. It has records of various housing agencies and social justice groups.
Yeah.
So Jessica said,
Urban Archives, I can't speak highly enough of that archives. It is a phenomenal resource.
Jessica says, who is commissioning these maps, and was it the bank specifically?
Well, I can answer that question, which is, it was everyone. It was private companies, it was banks, it was the federal government. So this particular redlining map, Jill, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was created by a private company and shared with the city. But the general practice of redlining was a federal government program, really. So it pretty much spans everything from private to public.
Cool. So the last one is just a comment. The city archives holds the records of Philadelphia operating departments. These records would be the result of their work. I have a question for you.
Okay.
What kind of feedback did you get from the public on this project, and especially of the residents of the immediate neighborhood?
I don't know. I don't know if anyone who's here can answer that. I can look through and see. I don't Oh, I saw Charisse here. Thanks for coming, Charisse. I don't know. Can anyone else answer that question? Like Jill or V and I saw Gail had a question, so maybe she can also ask that. Does anyone have any answers to that besides me? Because I don't, once it was up, it was sort of out of my hands, unfortunately. So I don't know the answer to that question. Gail, did you want to ask a question? You have to unmute yourself. Someone is asking a question while Gail is unmuting. Are you muted? Can't hear you now.
I can read out the question for you. Your work is very research-based, but do you also have a drawing or sketching practice? And how do you work through ideas visually?
Yeah, so that was one of the things that I was gonna show you guys if there was time, but since there are all these technical problems, I haven't been able to. But I did show you some of the images that at first, there was that one slide that has those 3 sketches. So that's a part of what I was doing. I can just pull out actually some of it now and show you guys just while the file is uploading. So this is one of the things that I have, which is a book for each project. And there's a lot of just notes and writing, but there's also, sketching that goes into it. And so, for this project, there definitely was some initial sketching that happened that was, going into trying to get the project in the first place. But like I said, once I received the award, the actual visual conceptualization of the project was done. So for this project, it was very heavily research-based. And the other project that I was gonna show you guys, is more visually based, and there was a research component, but it is more visually based. So that one, there's a lot more visual aspects that went into it, and there was a lot more sketching and stuff like that. Okay, so the second project I'm sharing with you today is Passage at Morris Jumel Mansion, which is in the Washington Heights neighborhood of New York City, one of the northernmost neighborhoods in Manhattan. As you can see, it is the oldest home in Manhattan and has an incredibly rich history, including when George Washington used it as a temporary headquarters during the Revolutionary War. So Morris Jumel Mansion was mostly a private residence passed between 3 families until New York City purchased the home from its last owners in 1903. The images on the right show the mansion similar to how it looks today. And as you can see, it's a little oasis, but it's surrounded by the usual tall buildings that we associate with New York City. The image on the left is from 1854, when the mansion would have been surrounded largely by farmland. Most of the visitors who come to the mansion are interested in the connection to the Revolutionary War, but what interested me most was this contrast between the dense, iconic city that we know and what the site would have looked like 200, 300, even 400 years ago. Today, a walk around Manhattan would provide little evidence of the people, geography, or wildlife that would have existed hundreds of years ago. So I was interested in seeing if I could find a way of telling the story of that drastic transformation over time. For this project, I decided to focus on the changes in the natural environment. But it's important to say that when Europeans landed on the southern tip of the island in the early 1600s, the Lenape people were already living there. By 1770, when this map was drawn, the native Lenape residents had been forced to migrate west. You can see that the city was already starting to take shape at the southern tip, and much of the area above the city had been tamed for agricultural purposes. Maps were some of the most useful resources that helped me to envision what the area looked like at different periods of time. And this map from 1865 shows the topography of the area around the house, indicated by the brown square, and that the city was encroaching on but had not quite reached the house. So I mentioned the serendipity of walking past the racial map during my archives tour. And I think serendipity also came into play in this project when I came across this interactive feature on the New York Times website, which sadly was taken down about halfway through my research. So the feature enabled viewers to overlay different maps of Manhattan, but also to see the growth of the city over time. In 1800, the city was just at the bottom of the island. By 1857, you can see there was a main road which traveled the length of the island, but the city was still concentrated in the lower half. And by 1898, the city had reached the house. At the same time that I was researching how the geography of the city changed over time, I was also researching the flora and fauna which would have lived in the area before European colonizers arrived. So this book, Mannahatta, was the Bible for that endeavor. At the back of the book is an index which lists every flora and fauna which would have existed on the island before it was colonized. I spent hours poring over that index, drawing and studying different plants and animals that I was considering featuring in the project. And I can show you some of those sketches at the end of the talk. One of the most abundant creatures in North America was the passenger pigeon. There are fascinating accounts of passenger pigeons darkening the skies with their flocks as they migrated. But unfortunately, because they migrated in such large groups, they were extremely easy targets. And people could just shoot up in the air as they flew past to hit dozens. So the story of the passenger pigeon is fascinating, but also disturbing because they went from being the most plentiful animal on the continent to being extinct in the span of about 100 years. And what was interesting to me was the connection between the growth of the city grid up the island of Manhattan and the demise of the passenger pigeon. So at this point, I knew that I wanted to somehow portray the connection between these two stories, the correlation between the growth of the city grid and the decimation of the natural environment, using the story of the passenger pigeon as a focal point. I also knew that I wanted to somehow work with the existing wallpaper in the house, almost all of which have motifs related to nature. One of the obvious places to transform was the stairwell, in part because it did not have wallpaper, but I also thought it would provide an interesting opportunity to show a transition through space and time. When you arrive on the landing on the second floor, the room across from the stairs is the Aaron Burr bedchamber. So this is the Aaron Burr bedchamber, and it was decorated in a style from 1832. So the wallpaper in that room was thematically very related to the project as well, because it combines a lattice or grid-based design with a wild grape motif. Originally, the wild grapes actually would have grown on the island and would have been a source for food for the people and animals living there. So I decided that the installation would culminate in the Burr bedroom, and I would use the year 1832 as the foundation for the design. So this is the installation when you enter on the ground floor. The southern tip of Manhattan is pretty much the same now as it was in 1832. I represented the map of Lower Manhattan in the trapezoidal shape under the stairs, and it's surrounded by a grid-based pattern. Because the layout of Lower Manhattan looks very much the same as it did 100 years ago, the beginning of the installation references the experience of being in the city today with little evidence of nature. And moving up the stairs, the piece moves from present to past, with the design dominated by the grid, transitioning to one in which nature takes over. So the large birds you see are red-tailed hawks, which are birds of prey that actually still sometimes make their nests in urban places, including New York City, but would also have been there 100 years ago. So you can see in this image some recent red-tailed hawks nesting in Manhattan. So as visitors proceed up the stairs, they move back in time. And as you can see from this detail, the grid recedes and the pattern with organic motifs takes over. You also see a transition from animals and plants that would have only existed today to those which would have existed around the site in previous generations. So the red-tailed hawk is still there and the passenger pigeons can be sighted, but first only as corpses. And at the top of the mural, you can see a group of passenger pigeons, as well as other flora and fauna which would have been prominent 100 years ago. So one element that I incorporated has a story similar to the passenger pigeon, and that's the American chestnut, which was a significant feature of the early American landscape, but around the same time that the last passenger pigeon was shot and the city reached the mansion, which is around the turn of the century, a chestnut tree from Asia was imported and brought with it a blight which nearly wiped out the tree in the span of 40 years. So though there are people working to bring it back, it is now functionally extinct. And you can see on the left some painting studies that I did of the chestnut leaves, and then I repainted them before incorporating them into the pattern. You can see them here so that they would integrate with the surrounding styles and colors. So one of my goals for the project was to create a piece that seamlessly blended with the house. In this view, you see the existing wallpaper in the foreground and my piece in the background. The mural combines elements which are appropriated from the existing patterns in the house with elements that I painted to reference styles represented in the house. So I painted all of the birds in a style reminiscent of the mansion's chinoiserie mural. And this is a detail of that mural at right. And I also appropriated the moss from the chinoiserie mural here. You can see the moss here, and then I incorporated it in the pattern here, in the ground here. So I used the lines and the dots from the hallway pattern to create the grid designs. You can see these lines and dots translated here. So I thought I would just zoom out again to show you the overview and so you can see the visual connection between the mural and the hallway wallpaper. And then progress up the stairs with the transition from grid to organic. And you can see this red overlay shows basically where the grid ended, and that's around West 21st Street. So this section of the map would be right around here. And then this is a view moving up the stairs. And this is a section on the landing where you're moving up to the second floor, and you can see a combination of the appropriated and painted elements, as well as some of the other creatures I threw in, like spring peepers, which are here, and swamp sparrows. You can also see the grid ending and how the grape leaf pattern dominates. And at the top, here and here, some of the grape leaves become three-dimensional and appear to grow off the wall. And this creates a transition to the culmination of the installation in the Aaron Burr bed chamber. So for the final part of the piece, I wanted to create an environment in which nature takes over. Throughout the mansion's decorative elements, the motifs of the grid and organic elements were present, and this was the case even on the carpet in the room. So here you see the grape leaves growing off the walls and onto the floor and starting to erase the grid to create a space that's more suggestive of its original wild state. Here's another view of that room and the final view of the Aaron Burr bedroom.
Well, that was a beautiful presentation, and those birds are amazing. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. Does anyone have, like, we have time for like one last quick question?
Gail?
Anyone, or comments? So impressive, Talia, from research to its beautiful outcome, from Margarita.
Thanks.
Audio. A simple question.
Okay.
I'd like to know how long your project will be on display, the one in Philadelphia.
At the archives, it's permanent.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, unless they move again or something. Yeah.
Is it open to the public? I can just
absolutely. Yeah.
show up.
Walk in. Yep. And you can download the app on your phone if your phone is new enough, or you can ask them. They have about 20 tablets, and you can ask for a tablet, and then it's bigger and you can see the AR animation more clearly and stuff. So
thanks. I'm going to check it out.
Awesome. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Talia. This was a great presentation, very interesting. Thank you everyone for joining us. And I guess there are a few things that were left unsaid. So if you want to visit Talia's website and contact her for more info, please do so. And I'll add it one more time in the chat here. And we appreciate everyone coming out tonight.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I'm so sorry for the technical problems.
It happens, you know.
But I really appreciate you all being here. And
all right. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you so much, Angela.